Long before our screens glowed, the world already had a Silk Road. It wound across Asia, a braid of caravan trails where camels swayed and merchants bartered silk for silver, jade for glass. That road stitched civilizations together. It carried paper, gunpowder, and stories that reshaped empires. Centuries later, another road would take its name. This one had no dust, no dawn, only the soft electric pulse of data. It lived in the hidden folds of the Internet, a place reached not by compass but by code. Its creator believed that trade itself was good, that only coercion made it evil. He dreamed of a marketplace ruled not by governments but by consent. That dream would change lives, create fortunes, destroy others, and spark debates that still echo in courts and classrooms. It would be called the Silk Road, just like the ancient one, but this time its caravans were lines of encrypted packets moving through the dark. Every legend has a prelude. For this one, the prelude began with two inventions that were never meant to meet. The first was Tor, the onion router, built by researchers to protect privacy online. Data passed through layers of volunteer computers, each knowing only the next hop, until the trail dissolved behind it. Governments funded it for secure communication. Activists used it for safety. Technologists celebrated it as proof that privacy could exist in a connected world. The second was Bitcoin, born from a 2008 paper signed by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto. It described money without banks, value without borders, a ledger written by consensus instead of decree. Where Tor made identity optional, Bitcoin made intermediaries unnecessary. Together, they formed the two halves of a possibility, a private world with its own currency. In Austin, Texas, a young physicist named Ross Ulbricht was reading. He loved economics, liberty, and the philosophy of voluntary exchange. He studied materials science, hiked in the hills, and filled notebooks with ideas about how people might trade freely, without coercion or war. By his late 20s he wanted to test those ideas. What if, he wondered, there were a marketplace where every transaction was voluntary, where government had no say? In 2011, from a small apartment filled with books and computer parts, Ross began to build. He installed Tor, studied Bitcoin, and wrote the code for a hidden website. It would use escrow to protect buyers and sellers, Bitcoin to move money, and anonymity to level the playing field. He called it the Silk Road, a poetic echo of history, a promise of exchange without borders. At first there was little to see. A login page, a list of goods, an idea whispered among early adopters. But perfect names travel fast. By the spring of 2011 the first listings appeared, books, curiosities, then substances that were illegal in most countries but desired in many. Forums began to buzz. Someone claimed a hidden market existed where you could buy almost anything using Bitcoin. Others laughed until they found it themselves. By that summer hundreds of listings filled the pages. Vendors adopted pseudonyms and built reputations through reviews. Buyers rated shipments and described quality as if reviewing coffee beans. Anonymity was paradoxically polite. Transactions were faster, safer, quieter than anyone expected. Ross, behind his screen, took on the name Dread Pirate Roberts, borrowed from a film. Under that mask he posted essays about freedom and non-aggression. He believed Silk Road was a social experiment proving that peaceful exchange could thrive even in illegality. To others, especially law enforcement, it looked like a digital bazaar for drugs and forged papers. Two realities coexisted: a utopian experiment and a criminal enterprise, both built on the same code. Then came the Gawker effect. In June 2011, the tech site published an article titled, "The Underground Website Where You Can Buy Any Drug Imaginable." Overnight, traffic exploded. Thousands downloaded Tor for the first time. Bitcoin's price tripled. Within days, senators were demanding investigation. The marketplace that had thrived in obscurity was suddenly famous. Inside the site, moderators struggled with the flood. New vendors arrived daily. Scams multiplied. Ross improved the code, hired helpers, and reminded users to stay careful. The forum section became its own society, people debating philosophy, harm reduction, and the morality of markets. Outside, investigators from the FBI, the DEA, and Homeland Security began their patient work. They learned Tor, traced wallets, joined undercover. The chase had begun, though few yet understood the scale. By 2012, Silk Road handled tens of thousands of transactions. Analysts would later estimate more than $200 million in total sales. Ross refined his rules. No stolen data, no weapons, no violence. He thought of himself as an idealist proving a point. But anonymity is fragile. Years earlier, he had once posted under his real name while recruiting for a project called Silk Road. That small detail would become the thread investigators pulled to unwind everything. Agents from multiple agencies joined forces. They studied timestamps, chat logs, and servers. They watched, waited, mapped. And then, one afternoon in October 2013, they moved. Ross was in a public library in San Francisco, laptop open, logged in as the Dread Pirate Robert. Undercover agents created a distraction. In that instant, another agent grabbed the computer before he could close it. The world he had built froze on the screen. Within hours a banner appeared online. This hidden site has been seized by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Headlines circled the globe. The first great darknet market had fallen. Ross Ulbricht was charged with narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and computer crimes. Prosecutors called him the mastermind of a billion-dollar empire. To supporters, he was an idealist crushed by the system he tried to question. In 2015, he received 2 life sentences plus 40 years without parole. The verdict echoed across the digital world. The Silk Road was gone, but its story had only begun. The Silk Road had fallen, but the idea refused to die. On hidden forums, users mourned as if a city had burned. Even in their grief, programmers and dreamers began rebuilding. An empty space on the internet never stays empty for long. They called the new project Silk Road 2.0. Its administrator, using the alias DEFCON, promised the same ideals: liberty, voluntary exchange, non-violence, but with stronger security and better code. He wrote to the community, saying that markets are not websites, they are people. And so, only weeks after Ross Ulbricht's arrest, the bazaar reopened. Listings bloomed again. Powders, pills, books, philosophies. Vendors returned, customers returned, and somewhere far away investigators quietly watched. By 2014, there were dozens of darknet markets: Agora, Evolution, Pandora, Hydra, and others. Each tried to improve on the last. Some used multiple cryptographic signatures for each transaction. Some spread their servers across continents. Others claimed ethical guidelines or charity donations. It was an arms race of anonymity. Bitcoin had become famous. Its price surged beyond $1,000. Investors, speculators, and journalists now used the same technology that once hid in the shadows. The currency that fueled the Silk Road was trading on Wall Street screens. To participants it felt like rebellion and innovation tangled together. To governments it looked like a storm of risk and opportunity. In November 2014, the illusion of safety cracked again. Authorities from 17 countries launched a massive operation, Operation Onimus, meaning without name. Hundreds of hidden websites were seized. Silk Road 2.0's servers vanished overnight. Defcon, whose real name was Blake Benthall, a young aerospace engineer, was arrested in San Francisco. Once again headlines declared victory. Once again new markets rose almost immediately. Every closure was a pruning, not an end. The roots remained: privacy technology, cryptocurrency, and human desire. By 2015, law enforcement had evolved. Agencies built cryptocurrency analysis units and learned to trace coins once thought untraceable. Companies like Chainalysis offered digital forensics. Investigators joined markets undercover, spoke the slang, built reputations, and gathered evidence quietly. But programmers evolved too. They turned to privacy-focused coins like Monero and Zcash. They cloned databases so that if one market fell, another could rise the same day. What began as a single website had become an ecosystem. In 2015, a new empire appeared: Alphabri. It was sleek, fast, and ambitious, run by a young Canadian in Thailand named Alexander Kazes. He called himself Alpha02. He treated his market like a startup, complete with uptime statistics and customer support. At its height, Alphabri hosted more than 350,000 listings and handled hundreds of millions in cryptocurrency. But pride leaves fingerprints. Kazes reused an email address linked to his real name. Investigators followed it. In July 2017, Thai police and the FBI raided his home. Days later, he was found dead in custody, and his wealth, spread across digital wallets, was seized. That same summer, another market, called Hansa, was secretly taken over by Dutch police. When Alphabri collapsed, its refugees flocked to Hansa, unaware that law enforcement controlled it. For weeks, investigators recorded every transaction, then shut the site down. It was the most sophisticated operation in darknet history. For a moment, the hidden networks were silent. But only for a moment. By the end of that year, new names appeared: Dream, Empire, Wall Street Market. Cut off one head, and two grew back. Each lasted a little shorter than the one before. Trust eroded. Exit scams multiplied. Some administrators vanished with millions in escrow. Others shut down voluntarily, exhausted. Still, commerce flowed. Where there is demand, there will always be supply. Tor remained open to both. While the darknet mutated, its influence seeped into the daylight. Bitcoin, once stained by association, became an accepted financial instrument. The blockchain was hailed as a revolution in transparency. Governments that once denounced cryptocurrency began experimenting with their own versions. The same invention that powered an underground economy was now being studied by central banks and corporations. Even Tor, once criticized, became a vital tool for journalists and dissidents. From the seed of a scandal grew a forest of legitimate uses. Behind every screen, there were still people. Vendors who saw themselves as small entrepreneurs. Buyers seeking escape or relief. Moderators juggling ethics and profit. Some were arrested, some reformed, some disappeared into ordinary life. Researchers found that online markets sometimes reduced street violence but widened access. They were safer in some ways, riskier in others. Reality, as always, was complex. Ross Ulbricht remained in prison. He read, studied, and wrote letters that traveled far beyond the walls. He spoke of meditation, regret, and perspective. Supporters saw him as a symbol of excessive punishment. Critics called him a warning. Either way, his name had become part of digital history. Universities now taught the Silk Road case. Economists analyzed its systems of trust. Criminologists dissected its fall. Ethicists debated whether an idea can be judged apart from its consequences. Students listened, argued, and took notes as if studying an ancient civilization. By the end of the decade, the pattern had become clear. Build, bloom, collapse, repeat. For every takedown, a successor. For every innovation, a vulnerability. The darknet and the daylight continued their endless dance, circling each other like two halves of the same coin. Above them hovered the enduring questions: what is freedom for? How much privacy can a society bear? And who decides the line between liberty and law? The Silk Road left no map, only echoes. Each echo became a mirror, reflecting what people valued and feared. And through those mirrors the world kept studying itself. The arrests and takedowns were not the end of the story. They were the beginning of reflection. Governments, universities, and citizens began to realize that the digital world had borders of its own, and that laws written for geography could not easily cross them. After 2013, lawmakers everywhere tried to catch up. They strengthened anti-money laundering rules, required identity checks on exchanges, and argued about how much encryption a free society should allow. Some countries banned privacy coins. Others embraced them as experiments in economic liberty. In conference halls, prosecutors showed slides of the Silk Road's interface, its vendor ratings, its escrow screens, as if displaying artifacts from a vanished civilization. They called it proof that law must adapt to a world without walls. Academia followed close behind. Economists discovered that the Silk Road's feedback system had created trust without identity, a concept once thought impossible. Computer scientists mapped its infrastructure. Sociologists studied the forums where users discussed addiction and ethics beside profit margins. Some researchers even interviewed former vendors. They described professionalism, branding, customer service, careful packaging, as if centuries of commerce had condensed into 2 years of code. The irony was clear. A marketplace born outside the law had taught the world new lessons about digital design and governance. When the Silk Road fell, hundreds of mirrors appeared. Some copied its code, others copied its spirit. They adopted similar names: Silk Road Reloaded, Silk Road Reborn, Open Bazaar. But none carried the same weight. The early philosophy faded. The talk of voluntarism and harm reduction gave way to the language of profit. Where the first Silk Road felt like a cause, the copies felt like commerce. The dream of a free digital marketplace had become routine business in the shadows. Every legend becomes myth, and every myth becomes data. The media turned the story into modern folklore. Documentaries called it the Amazon of drugs. Others portrayed Ross Ulbricht as a tragic visionary. Podcasts retold the arrest, the trial, the philosophies that collided. Even people who never used Tor could repeat the outline: a hidden market, a mysterious founder, a library arrest. The Silk Road joined the gallery of Internet legends. Napster, WikiLeaks, Anonymous, each a story about rebellion, discovery, and unintended consequence. Beyond headlines were quieter ripples. Families received subpoenas or phone calls. Young coders faced years in prison. Parents who had never heard of Bitcoin tried to understand how it had changed their children's lives. Courtrooms became classrooms. Judges and juries learning the language of cryptographic hashes and digital evidence. Supporters of Ross Ulbricht gathered signatures for clemency. Others argued that the sentence fit the scale of the crime. The debate circled endlessly around one question: can good intent erase bad impact when technology multiplies both? No answer satisfied everyone. Meanwhile, technology kept evolving. New cryptocurrencies appeared: Ethereum, Monero, Scash, each promising stronger privacy or programmable value. Tor improved. Other anonymity systems like I2P and Freenet grew. The same principles that had hidden contraband now protected whistleblowers and patients. The mathematics remained neutral, the uses did not. History, as always, mixed virtue and vice. Even after major crackdowns, fragments of the dark market economy survived. Some vendors moved to encrypted messaging. Others built decentralized trading apps with no central server to seize. Commerce flowed through new channels, smaller, quicker, harder to trace. Researchers watched these systems evolve like living organisms. Growth, mutation, adaptation, collapse, rebirth. Each cycle revealed something about human nature: that connection will always find a way. Beyond technology, the Silk Road left an emotional legacy. It reminded the world that the Internet is not a place but a reflection of ourselves. Every promise of freedom carries a cost. Every tool of privacy can shelter both courage and cruelty. That realization changed culture. Tech companies began hiring ethicists. Governments debated data rights. The phrase "dark web" became common language, not just as mystery, but as mirror. Writers compared Ross Ulbricht to Prometheus, the mythic firebringer punished for his gift. The comparison was poetic, not literal, but it captured the feeling that invention and punishment often travel together. In classrooms, students debated the case. Was the Silk Road civil disobedience or organized crime? Should code be treated as speech or as action? Does a platform owner carry moral responsibility for what others do? Each generation found its own answers, and none were final. By the late 2010s, the line between the darknet and the everyday web had blurred. Cryptocurrency wallets sat in app stores. Tor helped reporters work safely. Governments explored digital currencies of their own. Technologies born in secrecy had become infrastructure. The Silk Road's banner, once filled with manifestos, was now a museum artifact, preserved in screenshots and archived code. A ghost of a website whispering of a time when people believed anonymity could build a better world. Return to the image of the desert. Stars above, sand below. Ancient caravans moving under the moon, modern data caravans flowing through fiber. Two roads, ancient and digital, crossing in imagination. Both carried trade. Both carried ideas. Both revealed how far people will go to connect. The Silk Road story was never just about crime or code. It was about the oldest human desire, to reach across distance and be free. The Silk Road was gone, but its sound lingered in the circuitry of the world. Like the faint vibration after a bell stops ringing, the idea kept resonating through law, politics, and art. In the years that followed, engineers improved the very tools that had enabled it. They strengthened encryption, rebuilt anonymity networks, and debated ethics in open-source conferences. Whenever the Silk Road was mentioned, they spoke with mixed feelings: pride that their code had worked, unease about how it had been used. Academics wrote about the ethics of anonymity. They compared privacy to fire, vital for warmth, dangerous when uncontained. The Silk Road had been a spark, and the world was still deciding what to build, or what to burn, with that flame. Governments that once ignored cryptocurrency now studied it. Central banks tested their own digital coins. Police units trained specialists fluent in blockchain forensics. Knowledge that once lived on hacker forums moved into textbook. Diplomats began speaking of digital sovereignty. Lawmakers argued whether online anonymity should be restricted for safety or protected for democracy. Both sides quoted the same example, the Silk Road, each claiming it proved their case. Artists found poetry in the contrast between desert caravans and data packet. Museums displayed screenshots of the marketplace beside ancient trade map. Painters turned Bitcoin addresses into calligraphy. Documentaries retold the story in tones of wonder and regret. Ross Ulbricht's letters from prison became source material for plays and podcasts. Audiences listened, not always agreeing, but always moved. Economists returned to an old question. Can strangers cooperate without a ruler? Inside the Silk Road, reputation had replaced police, cryptography had replaced banks, and mutual benefit had replaced force. For a time it worked. Then it collapsed, not because math failed, but because people are human. That paradox traveled outward. Designers of sharing economy platforms studied its lessons. Startups borrowed its trust systems. Each tried to keep the innovation, to lose the naivety. Investigators who once chased the marketplace admitted respect for its ingenuity. Some said it changed how they viewed privacy. Former users said it changed how they viewed economics. Even in failure, the Silk Road had educated everyone who touched it. From prison, Ross Ulbricht wrote about peace and perspective. I wanted to empower people, he said. I see now how power behaves, even when it means well. His words traveled quietly through social media, echoes of a cautionary philosophy. By the early 2020s, entire industries ran on blockchain technology. Governments explored digital identification. Hospitals used distributed ledgers to track medicine. The same mathematics that once hid contraband now protected patients and journalists. Tools once condemned had become part of normal life. Historians began calling the Silk Road the first great experiment in digital sovereignty. It showed how one person, with code and conviction, could challenge the architecture of global control. It also showed how ideals warp under the weight of scale and secrecy. When you remove the walls, you must still build trust. When you grant freedom, you must also teach wisdom. When you open a road, someone will travel it farther than you imagined. Even now, faint traces of the original site remain, archived code, forgotten backups, stories retold in classrooms. Its spirit lives on in every debate about privacy and surveillance, in every headline about cryptocurrencies. It reminds us that technology is never separate from humanity. It is humanity extended into circuitry. And like any echo, it fades slowly, shaping the silence it leaves behind. Picture the desert once more. Night has fallen. The old caravans sleep beneath the stars. The new caravans of data, of dreams, still travel. The same wind that once carried sand now carries signal. The same curiosity moves both. The Silk Road story is not only about code or crime. It is about what humans do when given new kinds of freedom. Night lingers longest before dawn. The world after the Silk Road was quieter, wiser, still uncertain. We had looked into the mirror of technology and seen both brilliance and danger. Now the task was simply to live with what we had learned. Years passed. The great operations faded from headlines. Dark market sites came and went, smaller, more cautious. For ordinary people, life moved on. Bitcoin rose, fell, and rose again. Students studied blockchains in class. Retirees owned fractions of coins. The Silk Road became memory, archived screenshots, seized hard drives, a story told in podcasts and classrooms. It now belonged to historians and to the quiet hours of those who wonder how ideals turn into consequences. When the pandemic years arrived and the whole world moved online, we entered the space the Silk Road had tested first, a planet linked by invisible infrastructure, dependent on trust between strangers. We learned the same lessons more gently about supply, identity, and fragility. Technologies once born in secrecy suddenly served hospitals, teachers, and scientists. Privacy networks protected medical data. Cryptographic ledgers managed logistics. Humanity, as always, turned its inventions toward survival. And somewhere in that circuitry, the ghost of the Silk Road watched silently, its purpose inverted, its code redeemed. Ross Ulbricht lived within the rhythm of prison days. He read, studied, painted, wrote letters. Supporters outside kept campaigning, others moved on. Journalists who once wrote of him in scandal now wrote of him in reflection. His story had shifted from crime report to parable. A petition for clemency gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. It did not erase what had happened, but it showed that people were still listening. His mother spoke publicly, calling him a dreamer undone by scale. She reminded audiences that justice, like code, is written by humans. In his letters, Ross wrote of peace, forgiveness, and compassion. They spread online like fragments of poetry, soft counterpoints to the hard data of his sentence. Every generation inherits a version of the same debate. The ancients argued about trade and empire. The Enlightenment argued about liberty and law. Our century argues about data and privacy. The Silk Road only gave the argument new form. Should freedom be absolute? Can transparency coexist with dignity? What happens when a network designed for openness becomes a mirror of everything human, both compassion and greed? There are no final answers. Perhaps the lesson is humility, that each invention mirrors our own character, and improvement must begin there, not in the code. From controversy grew communities of harm reduction and digital ethics. Former agents joined privacy rights panels. Programmers learned to design accountability without surveillance. A slow balance formed, safety and freedom, caution and curiosity. That balance is the Silk Road's quiet legacy. Not in contraband or cryptography, but in the maturity it forced upon the Internet itself. After it, no one could claim that technology was neutral. Every line of code carries moral weight, and every user carries choice. Return now to the image that opened our story, a desert beneath ancient stars, a caravan moving by starlight, bells chiming softly. Above it, invisible threads of data cross the sky, pulses of information linking live. The old Silk Road carried silk, spices, stories. The new one carried code, currency, conviction. Both were born from the same impulse, to reach across distance and to trade. Both taught that connection is never free, it always demands responsibility. When the dust settles and the servers cool, what remains are simple truths. Freedom without empathy becomes chaos. Control without compassion becomes tyranny. Between them lies the fragile path we call civilization. The hum of the digital world softens to a lullaby. Routers blink like stars. Packets of data travel through hidden networks, carrying laughter, sorrow, invention, and love. Most are harmless. Some are not. All are human. Close your eyes. Imagine those ancient caravans again, footsteps fading into sand, moonlight touching canvas. Imagine the servers humming in their glass towers, modern caravans of code gliding through fiber. Between them lies thousands of years, and yet the same heartbeat of curiosity. The Silk Road story ends not with judgment, but with awareness that technology magnifies who we already are, and that the road ahead, like the road behind, will always belong to travelers seeking meaning. Breathe in. Let the wind quiet. Somewhere, in the silence between signals, history rests. The old world and the new are one road again.